All right, so we've got a really fascinating set of documents in front of us today, and each one, well, it kind of offers a little piece of the puzzle, when it comes to the JFK assassination.
Yeah, it's a lot to sift through, definitely.
Exactly, and that's what we're here for today. We're going to dig into each of these records, figure out what they say, and most importantly, try to figure out how they connect back to the assassination and all the investigations that followed.
Right, like specific pieces of evidence.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Our first document is 104-1003 1hour041.pdf. What's the gist of this one?
Well, it's a memo, and it's dated June 1st, 1964. Basically, it documents a conversation between someone from the CIA's Soviet Russia division, so that's the SR division, and the chief of station in Helsinki. The topic, you guessed it, Lee Harvey Oswald and his stay in Helsinki back in October 1959.
Oh, so just before he went to the Soviet Union.
Yeah, exactly, right before that pivotal moment.
So how does this connect to the assassination investigation?
It shows the Warren Commission doing their due diligence, trying to piece together Oswald's anything that could be relevant. And his trip to the Soviet Union, well, that was a huge red flag for them. So this memo, it outlines how the CIA station in Helsinki was cooperating with the Warren Commission, specifically with one of their investigators, a guy named Carl Freiberg.
Okay, so what kind of information did they share with Freiberg?
Well, they went over some pretty basic stuff about Oswald's time in Helsinki. Like when he arrived, he came from France on, I think it was a Finnish ship. They talked about when his visa expired and that he left for the Soviet border by train on October 2nd, 1959. But here's where it gets interesting. They also talked about the Soviet consulate in Helsinki. Apparently, it wasn't too far from the city center.
Oh, how far are we talking?
Like 25 minutes by car, tops, and even faster by taxi, just 5 minutes, something like that.
So pretty close then.
Right, and you have to think, the Warren Commission, they're seeing this and wondering, did Oswald maybe try to visit the consulate during that short time he was in Helsinki? The memo even mentions that the consulate, it usually stayed open on Saturdays in '59, and Oswald got there on a Friday, so...
So the opportunity was definitely there.
Right, and there's another detail in the memo about records. The U.S. consulate in Helsinki, they only kept their passenger lists for 6 months.
Oh, I see. So by the time the investigation rolled around, those records would have been long gone.
Exactly, a dead end. But the memo does say that if the State Department ever asked about Oswald, the Helsinki station would help prepare a reply. And Freiberg, he even suggested some more things to include in those inquiries. It's clear they were trying to leave no stone unturned.
That's interesting. We also have an image here. It's named the same as the PDF. What can we get from that?
It's basically just a visual confirmation of the memo. You see the title, all about Oswald's stay in Helsinki, the date, June 1st, 1964, and the early points about Freiberg contacting the Helsinki station. Just further confirmation that the memo is what it says it is.
Okay, makes sense. Let's move on to 104-1004-10143.pdf. This one's almost completely redacted, isn't it?
Yeah, heavily redacted. It was released under the JFK Assassination Records Act of 1992, but all we can really see is the document number and the info about it being released under this specific act.
So if we can't see what it says, how is it connected to the JFK assassination?
Well, simply put, it's in the collection. It's part of the records released under the JFK Assassination Records Act. And that tells us that someone, somewhere decided that this document, it was relevant, it might be connected to the events, the investigations, the people involved in the assassination. Even though the content is obscured, the fact that it was released at all suggests that it had information that was at one time deemed important to understanding what happened.
Right. And the heavy redactions, well, that only makes you more curious.
Oh, for sure. They always make you wonder what was considered so sensitive that it had to be hidden.
Yeah, it's like a puzzle piece that's missing. We also have an image for this one. Does it give us any more clues?
It shows the top of the first page, confirms that it was released in 2025 under the JFK Assassination Records Act and the document number. But it also says Box 8, which is probably just a reference to where it's kept in the National Archives, how they organize all those assassination-related materials.
Okay, so a little bit of archival context. We've also got another image here. This one's labeled Memo for Record Lee H. Wigren.
Ah, this is taking us back to our first document, 104-1003-10041.pdf. It's a memo for the record dated June 1st, 1964, written by Lee H. Wigren, who worked in the CIA's Soviet Russia division. It's basically a summary of that same conversation we were talking about with the chief of station in Helsinki about Oswald.
I noticed there's another document number here, 716838.
Probably just an internal CIA tracking number.
Makes sense. It also says, same as released doc hashtag 5040 for an FOIA review in June 1976. What does that tell us?
So that means this specific bit of information about Oswald in Helsinki, it was actually reviewed under the Freedom of Information Act back in June 1976. Basically, it was declassified and made public back then, which again just shows how important this piece of the puzzle was considered to be.
Okay, so already declassified back then. All right, let's move on to another heavily redacted document, 104 1004 10156.pdf.
Yeah, same story here, released under the JFK Assassination Records Act, but most of it's blacked out. It's hard to say much, but again, the fact that it's in this collection, it suggests that it's somehow relevant to the assassination investigation.
All right, and what about the image for this one?
It's the top of the first page, confirming it was released in 2025 and showing the document number. Just like the other redacted one, it says Box 8, and then this one has a sanitized file number 335. That sanitized part, that's the big clue. It tells us that parts of the original document, they were removed or blacked out before it was released publicly.
So what was considered too sensitive to share? That's what always gets you thinking. All right, next up we have 104 1004 10213.pdf. This one's marked secret.
Okay, so this one's a memorandum. It's all about, the emigration of Soviet citizens to the U.S. Specifically, it looks at those who are married to or accompanied by foreign spouses. It even mentions a previous memo on the same topic from April 6, 1964.
So Soviet emigration policy, how does that tie in with the JFK assassination?
Well, remember Oswald's wife, Marina?
Of course, Marina Pusakova.
Right, she was a Soviet citizen. The Warren Commission, they wanted to know exactly how she came to the U.S. So this document, it gives us some insight into the usual procedures for Soviet citizens who married foreigners and how long it took them to emigrate.
I see. So they're trying to see if Marina's case was typical or if anything seemed unusual.
Exactly. The memo mentions this guy, Mr. Slauson, who analyzed 26 cases of Soviet immigration with foreign spouses. And while a lot of them involve people who were only living in the USSR temporarily, the memo makes a point of saying that one case was similar to Oswald's, a defector who married a Soviet woman. So it seems like they were looking for any precedents, any parallels they could find.
Trying to fit the pieces together. Did this memo mention the Warren Commission at all?
Oh, yeah, directly. It says that volume 52 of the Warren Commission report, it included a transcript of testimony that was given before the commission. And in that transcript, there was a re-interview with Marina Oswald. So this memo, it's directly linked to the official investigation. It's part of the information they gathered about Marina's past and how she got to the U.S.
Okay, so pretty direct connection, and we've got a bunch of images related to this memo too.
Right, they flesh things out a bit. You've got handwritten notes, which always suggests that someone was actively reviewing and analyzing this stuff. One page, it's all about the analysis of those 26 immigration cases. It mentions discussions with Mr. Slauson and refers back to that earlier memo we talked about. And then there's this table. It summarizes all those cases. It goes into detail about the foreign spouse's job, when the Soviet spouse made travel arrangements, how long the visa processing took, and when they finally arrived in the West. Really granular stuff.
Wow, that's really detailed.
It is. And they even break down the cases into categories like American women who married Soviets, American students, clergymen, all kinds of stuff. They even noted whether the Soviet spouse actually left with their foreign partner. They really went all out trying to understand the ins and outs of this whole process, probably trying to see if Marina's case fit the pattern or if anything stood out.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, moving on. This next one's pretty straightforward. It's a classified message titled, Title Oswald, Assassin or Fall Guy, dated September 30th, 1964. Gets right to the point, doesn't it?
Yeah, no beating around the bush with this one. It's a message sent from the director, we don't know who because their name's redacted, to a bunch of different places in Europe. Bonn, Frankfurt, all over. And the title, it just lays out the central question they're trying to answer about Oswald.
So what does this classified message tell us?
Well, it says that based on some captured Gestapo documents, Oswald joined the German Communist Party. In May 1932, even gave a specific membership number. It claims he went to the USSR around then and stayed until May 1962. And get this, it says that while he was gone, his library was looked after by his fiancée, a woman named Anna Shinsky. They're asking for a full background check on all of this, any pre-WWII references to a Djorston and fiancé, and checks with the BDC, which I'm guessing is some kind of German records repository. They even want photos, if they can find any, and info on how to locate this fiancé.
Wait, hold on. 1932, Oswald was born in 1939.
Exactly. That's a huge red flag. Right away, you know something's off. This information about Oswald, it's just wrong.
So what does that tell us about the investigation?
I think it shows just how chaotic things were after the assassination. You've got all this information flying around, some of it accurate, some of it not. They were chasing down every lead, even if it turned out to be a dead end. The fact that they were looking into this German Communist Party connection, this fiancé, even though the dates are clearly wrong, it suggests they were trying to dig up anything they could on Oswald's past, even if it meant chasing down bad intel.
Makes you wonder what else they might have looked into. Okay, next up we have a form 104-1006-10247.pdf, dated November 10th, 1960. It's a name check and consolidation request.
Right, so this is for a Soviet guy, Roman Fedorovich Dedkov, born in 1927, and his wife, Velasa Nikolaevna Dedkova. Apparently, they applied for visas to India sometime before April 1952. Then, in September 1960, Roman Dedkov got a Soviet passport and was supposed to head to New Delhi to work as an English teacher at the Soviet embassy for 2 years. But the form says they don't know if he actually went, and they want to put all this info into a CIA 201 file.
Okay, so this doesn't seem to be directly related to Oswald. How does it fit into the bigger picture?
It's more about understanding how intelligence agencies operated back then during the Cold War. Tracking Soviet citizens, especially those with official roles abroad, was pretty standard practice. This name check, the 201 file, it's all part of that. It helps us see how someone like Oswald with his Soviet wife might have been on the radar of U.S. intelligence. And that consolidation request, it shows they were trying to centralize all the information they had on people they thought might be important, from an intelligence perspective.
Okay, so it's about the broader context of intelligence gathering during that era. All right, next we've got a secret dispatch, 104-1007-10345.pdf, dated December 23rd, 1964, with the subject Warren Commission Testimony Selected Excerpts.
This one's important, and it's directly related to the assassination. It's a dispatch from the chief of the CIA's Counterintelligence and Research and Analysis Division, that's CIRNA, and it went out to all the chiefs of station. Basically, it says that after President Kennedy was killed, everyone started focusing on how hard it is to protect the president. They're putting a lot of emphasis on the responsibility of everyone at the CIA to help the Secret Service, make sure something like this never happens again.
So a sort of internal reflection on the security failures, or at least the challenges of presidential protection.
Right, an after-action report almost. And the dispatch also mentions the things the Warren Commission was dealing with, like how to improve presidential protection and how to get different counterintelligence operations to cooperate better. And here's the kicker. Attached to this dispatch were excerpts of testimony that was given to the Warren Commission by high-ranking CIA officers, both in the U.S. and overseas. So this shows that the CIA was actively involved with the Warren Commission's investigation, and they were sharing what they were finding, what they were worried about with their people all over the world.
A lot of internal communication and information sharing going on there. Okay, let's move on to 104-1FACET9-1721.pdf. This is a secret field distribution list. EAD hashtag 5847. Looks like we don't have the document itself, just the list.
Yeah, so we don't know exactly what was being sent out, but we do know it was considered sensitive, hence the secret classification. The fact that it was a field distribution list means this document went out to CIA stations and divisions all over the globe. That suggests that whatever it was pretty important for the CIA to know about and respond to. Especially in the context of the assassination, you have to wonder if this document might have been related to the agency's efforts to figure out what happened or to deal with the fallout.
It definitely raises more questions than it answers. Okay, next up is 104-1009-10222.pdf. This one's another blank page.
Yep, another one for the archives.
And we have another blank page with release information, 104-100-0000000.pdf.
Yep.
This next one's a secret letter, 104-1000-02.pdf from May 21st, 1982. It's addressed to someone named Anthony, and it's about a guy named Valery Vladimirovich Kostikov.
Okay, so Kostikov, he was a Soviet official at the embassy in Mexico City. This letter says that, according to intelligence records, he got to Mexico in 1959 and worked there as a consular officer and an attaché until August 1965. And they suspected he was trying to, get close to U.S. government employees, basically classic Cold War spy stuff.
Right, in Mexico City, that's where Oswald went to the Soviet embassy just weeks before the assassination.
Exactly. And the letter confirms that Oswald did go to the Soviet embassy in Mexico City in September or October 1963, trying to get a visa so he could go back to the USSR. And guess who handled his request? Kostikov. But here's the important part. The letter explicitly says there's no evidence of any connection between Oswald and Kostikov other than that one interaction about the visa.
So while it is interesting that Oswald interacted with someone suspected of being involved in intelligence activities, this document says it was just a routine consular thing.
Yeah, that's the takeaway here. Kostikov's background definitely makes you curious, but this particular record says there's nothing more to it.
Okay, good to know. All right, moving right along. 104-1010-10024.pdf. Another blank page with release information.
Another one for the file.
And now we have a confidential letter. 104 Charleville 1001 Torald F1005.pdf, dated March 30th, 1978. It's from a D.H. Jones for GML Blackburn can to a Mr. A.H. Stimson.
This letter mentions some correspondence they got from a guy named Sergei Gizorno. He claimed he gave some information about Oswald to the American vice consul in Sofia, Bulgaria, a guy named Tom Blackshear, back in August 1963, just a few months before the assassination. The letter also says that copies of Zerna's letters were sent to the FBI and to the head office in London.
So someone claiming to have known something about Oswald before the assassination.
Right. And the images that go with this letter, they lay out exactly what Zorno is claiming. In one letter from March 15th, 1978, he writes to the British ambassador and says that back in July 1963, he was in London and was questioned at the airport by immigration officials about an American defector, Lee Harvey Oswald, who he was told was planning to kill President Kennedy. He even says a police officer showed him Oswald's name in a newspaper. Another letter talks about his alleged meeting with the American vice consul in Sofia in August 1963, where he claims he warned him that Oswald was going to kill the president. And he says he got into trouble for reporting this information.
Those were pretty big claims, especially considering they came out so many years after the assassination.
Definitely. And it's always important to be cautious with these kinds of accounts that come out so long after the fact. Memories can be unreliable, and sometimes people, well, they might have their own reasons for coming forward with information like this, but it's still a piece of the puzzle, and it shows that even years later, people were still coming forward with information, or at least their version of events, trying to add to the story.
Right, trying to get their piece of the story out there. Okay, next we've got 104-1001-100076.pdf. This one's a routing and record sheet for a dispatch, and it's about the Warren Commission report, article on the investigation conducted by District Attorney Garrison.
So this ties into the aftermath of the Warren Commission and the investigation that was done by Jim Garrison, the district attorney in New Orleans. Garrison's investigation, it was pretty controversial. You know, he challenged the Warren Commission's conclusion that Oswald acted alone. This document, this little record sheet, shows that the CIA was keeping an eye on what Garrison was doing. It suggests they were still very interested in anything that challenged the official narrative.
Makes sense. They wouldn't want to be caught off guard. All right, next up we have 104-1001-100078.pdf. It's a secret memorandum from November 20th, 1968. Going from the Deputy Director for Plans to the Director. It's about a letter from Sir Charles Spry, the head of ASIO. That's the Australian Security Intelligence Organization.
So in his letter, Sir Charles recommended declassifying a document from the Warren Commission, CD 971. According to the memo, this document had to do with an investigation into some anonymous phone calls that were made to the Australian Embassy in Canberra, both before and after the assassination. And the CIA staff, in this memo, they agree that it should be declassified.
Anonymous phone calls, huh? Always makes you wonder what they could have said, especially to a foreign embassy.
Right. Like, were they tips, rumors, something more? It's definitely intriguing. The fact that they decided to declassify it suggests that whatever was in those calls, well, they didn't think it was a big secret anymore. Maybe they thought it could even help people understand the assassination better. It also shows that there was some level of cooperation between intelligence agencies, you know, in Australia and the U.S. when it came to this whole thing.
So maybe some international intrigue there. Okay, next we have 104-1007-10079.pdf, which looks like another blank page.
Yep, just keeping those pages in order.
And then we have 104-100-100-100-151.pdf, another blank page with release information.
Right.
Okay, this next document is a secret communication, 104-1001-1065.pdf, and it's from December 1993. It's talking about Cuba tidbits from late November SRAC.
So this one comes quite a bit later, 30 years after the assassination, actually. It's a report on some intercepted conversations from late November 1993 between an American official and a Honduran politician. They were discussing Fidel Castro and how he was apparently not too happy about the idea of having elections in Cuba. It also mentions a visit by some Americans to Cuba back in 1991, where they were hosted by Castro himself.
Cuban Castro, they always seem to come up in JFK assassination theories. Is there a connection here?
Well, it's definitely interesting, but it's hard to say for sure. It mentions figures who are often linked to those theories, but this specific document, it doesn't really tie back to the events of 1963. It does show, though, that people were still thinking about the Cuban angle even decades later.
Right, that part of the story never really went away. Okay, let's move on to 104, 13012, 13066.pdf. This one's another secret communication from February 1996, and it's about a write-in to NVTAD by individual claiming former association with Mem Bolton.
This one's a bit of a head-scratcher. It talks about a fax that was sent to the Denver office of NVTAD, whatever that is, from a guy named Robert Vernon. Vernon claimed he sabotaged something called Denver Magazine and said he had some information about things related to the JFK investigation, but he specifically says it's non-assassination stuff. He says he gave this information to the magazine to try to confirm some things he's alleging and mentions names of people who edit, write, and research government documents. It's hard to say what to make of this.
Non-assassination details related to the JFK investigation. That sounds a bit strange.
It does, right. But the fact that this guy came forward claiming to have information that might be connected to that time period, it could be relevant. Maybe it's part of a bigger effort to spread misinformation or to create confusion. Who knows? But it's worth noting, especially if we come across anything else related to this N.W. Bolton thing or this guy Vernon.
Okay, good point. We'll keep an eye out for that. All right, next we've got 104, 1013, 1067.pdf. This is another secret communication from February 1994, and it's about an assessment of SLAR Century 1 by FG486.
Lots of code names in this one. This seems to be an internal assessment of someone, maybe a potential asset or a target, though not named, just referred to with code names. The memo goes into detail about their personal life, driving habits, relationships, money problems, even their political views. They're trying to build a complete picture.
Sounds like standard intelligence work. Any connection to the JFK assassination?
From what we're seeing here, not really. It's probably just a routine assessment, totally unrelated to JFK. It might have ended up in this collection by mistake, or maybe it's part of a larger set of records from that time period.
Okay, so probably not a key piece of the puzzle. We're getting close to the end here. This next document is 104-1723, 1087.pdf. It's marked secret, and it's from November 15th, 1974. It's about the 201 system.
Now, this is an important one. It explains how the CIA kept track of people they were interested in, people they considered important for intelligence purposes. It explains the whole system, which is really key for understanding a lot of these documents.
And Oswald had a 201 file, didn't he?
That's right, he did. This document explains how the 201 system worked. It explains the 201 number, which is like a unique ID for each person, the 201 dossier, which is the main file, and a bunch of other indexes and things they used to keep track of it all. So if you want to understand what the CIA knew about Oswald or about anyone else connected to the assassination, you have to understand this system.
So it's like the instruction manual for understanding a whole category of these intelligence records.
Exactly.
All right, we're almost there. We've got a secret dispatch, 104-128-10124.pdf from March 19th, 1964. It's titled Typic Operational Special Activities Report on JM Wave's Relationship with Carbon-1.
JM Wave. So this dispatch goes into detail about the relationship between the CIA station in Miami, JM Wave, which was heavily involved in all the anti-Castro stuff going on at the time, and an asset, or maybe an operation, codenamed Carbon-1. The report covers everything, how their relationship started, different incidents that happened, the communication between them, and even assessments of how reliable Carbon-1 was and their potential. It even references a bunch of CIA cables with wave designations.
Okay, so a glimpse into how the CIA was operating in the Cuban sphere at the time. How does this connect to the assassination?
It doesn't mention Oswald directly, but it does show us how the CIA was working with anti-Castro groups in the Caribbean. And remember, Oswald did have some contact with those groups in the summer of 1963. So understanding how the CIA handled their assets and ran their operations in that whole world, it could be a piece of the puzzle. Maybe there's a connection there, even if it's not immediately obvious.
Right, we're looking for those hidden connections. Okay, 104, 104, 174, 13UC more.pdf. Another blank page with the release information.
Right.
Then we have a secret memorandum, 104-101049-10362.pdf, dated October 20th, 1959. It's all about a recorded conversation that took place in Miami between a Mr. William D. Pauley and some unidentified Cuban.
This memo summarizes a conversation that happened in October 1959. It's all about anti-Castro Cubans, their money troubles, their plans to try to overthrow Castro. Paulie, he's worried about how divided the different anti-Castro groups are, and he talks about how bad the economic situation is in Cuba.
So this predates the assassination, but it involves a group that's often linked to theories about it.
Exactly. It's a snapshot of the anti-Castro movement in Miami before the assassination. And because Oswald had some contact with those groups later on, in 1963, well, understanding what they were like, what their motivations were, it could help explain things.
Right, gives us some background. Okay, we're in the last couple here. 104, 100, 109, 10375.pdf, another blank page.
Right.
And finally, we have 104, 10051, 10006.pdf. This is a memorandum dated January 29, 1964 from M.D. Stevens to Files about the Lee Harvey Oswald case, hashtag 351164.
Okay, back to Oswald. This document dives right into the investigation. It summarizes a bunch of information about his case, including a newspaper article that pointed fingers at a guy named Abram Chase, a legal officer at the State Department. They claimed he was the reason Oswald was able to come back to the U.S. from the Soviet Union in June 1962.
So the State Department had a hand in bringing him back.
He seems that way. The memo also mentions some requests for security clearances. I guess they wanted to make sure Chase was clean. And then it talks about a congressman, Representative Walter. He was the chairman of the House Committee on Un-American Activities, and he was pretty critical of how the State Department handled Oswald's case. And then there's Samuel Wise. He was a counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, and he had actually met Oswald before. The memo says that Oswald lived in the Soviet Union for 2 years after he defected before he decided to come back. It seems like Oswald's defection and his return to the U.S., well, that raised a lot of eyebrows.
Definitely not your average tourist.
Not at all.
Okay, and our very last document, 104, 1051, 10170.pdf. It's secret. From November 15th, 1974. And again, it's about the 201 system.
Right. So this looks like it's basically a copy of that earlier document we talked about, the one that explains how the CIA's 201 file system works. I guess they just wanted to make sure they had all their bases covered, really emphasize how important this system is for understanding all these records.
Yeah, it seems like understanding that system is key to unlocking a lot of the secrets in these files.
Exactly.
Well, there you have it. We've reached the end of this deep dive, and it's been quite a journey. Each of these documents, it adds another piece to the puzzle, no matter how small, helping us understand the events surrounding the JFK assassination.
It's incredible how much information was gathered, how many different angles they were looking at. We've got the Warren Commission trying to piece together Oswald's time in Helsinki, the CIA reflecting on what went wrong with presidential protection, and the whole system they used to track people they thought were important. It really shows how complex and far-reaching the investigation was, and how it continued for years and years.
Yeah, and even though we've gone through all these documents, there are still so many unanswered questions. Like, what was really in those redacted parts? What about those anonymous phone calls to the Australian embassy? And was there more to Oswald's trip to Mexico City than meets the eye? It makes you think about how hard it is to truly know what happened, even with all this information available. It's almost like the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating. It's a puzzle that might never be fully solved, but every piece we find, every document we uncover, brings us a little bit closer to understanding what might have happened that day in Dallas.
Well said. And that's it for this deep dive.